If you've just started playing Realm Traveler, one thing becomes obvious pretty fast. You can't build every character. With more than 60 heroes spread across different factions and classes like warriors, mages, guards, and priests, it's really easy to waste resources on units that fall off later. And trust me, nothing hurts more than fully upgrading a hero just to realize they get destroyed in late game content. That's exactly why today's tier list is going to help you figure out which characters are actually worth investing in from the start, which supports can carry your entire team, and which heroes you should probably replace the moment you pull something better. We're going to break down the absolute top tier monsters dominating PvE, PvP, and boss fights, while also talking about some underrated picks that deserve more attention. Some characters are insane almost everywhere, while others only shine in very specific situations, so team synergy matters a lot more than you might expect. Whether you're a free-to-play player trying to spend resources carefully, or someone chasing the strongest meta comps possible, this tier list should help you avoid a lot of painful mistakes. So grab your favorite squad and let's rank the best characters in Realm Traveler. I'm quickly moving on to the video and I'm ranking characters in Realm Traveler. Before we start, if you enjoy these types of list videos, don't forget to like the video and subscribe. Enjoy watching.
My friends, only 0.1% of viewers subscribe. If you like this type of content, please do not forget to subscribe to the channel. Thank you in advance for your support.
The characters in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right, Alice, Dodo, Kiki, Titan, Vivian, Caliph, and Sura. By the time you scroll this far down the tier list, you start meeting the characters that feel like they were designed during somebody's lunch break. Not completely useless, not totally unplayable, but definitely giving strong, I tried my best energy. And honestly, that perfectly describes most of the D tier in Realm Traveler. Alice is one of those healers that looks comforting at first. She can heal, cleanse debuffs, and technically keep your team alive for a little while. The problem is that her healing numbers feel way too small once fights start getting serious. And since she brings almost no meaningful buffs to the table, you quickly realize other supports are doing her entire job while also making coffee on the side. Yui, Anna, Annie, and Eudora completely outclass her in basically every situation. Poor Alice feels like the tutorial version of a healer you replace and never look back at again. Then we have Dodo, who honestly sounds more dangerous than he actually is. He works as a tank that can share damage with allies, which sounds useful until you notice the rest of the battle is happening without him. He is decent for slow player versus environment stall teams, but outside of that, his impact is tiny. In a meta full of explosive team-wide abilities and aggressive pressure, Dodo kind of stands there like a security guard watching chaos unfold from a distance. Kiki Titan at least tries to be reliable. She is focused heavily on protecting a single ally, and for one specific target, she can actually do a respectable job. The issue is that modern fights in Realm Traveler are rarely about protecting just one person. Everyone is getting blasted by area attacks every 5 seconds. Kiki Titan lacks area presence, offensive pressure, and honestly any sense of threat. Your opponent usually sees her and thinks, okay cool, anyway, before deleting the rest of your team. Vivian is one of the more frustrating characters here because parts of her kit actually sound amazing. She can provide area healing, increase incoming healing through Bless, and even grant immunity effects. On top of that, she has Revive utility. That sounds incredible until you realize everything takes forever to happen. Her Revive cooldown feels ancient and her scaling depends on allies already being dead, which is both awkward and painfully slow in the current meta. It is like bringing a fire extinguisher after the building already collapsed. Caliph is the classic, looks amazing on paper character. Curse damage, burst potential, and anti-revive effects should make him terrifying. In theory, he sounds like the mastermind of some evil strategy composition. In reality, most players just pick Mile instead and move on with their lives. Caliph requires a huge amount of investment before he starts feeling threatening, and for most players, that investment simply is not worth the trouble. He is basically the expensive restaurant version of a meal you could get cheaper somewhere else. And finally, there is Sura, who feels trapped in a completely different era of the game. Lifesteal, counterattacks, and burst effects are all nice ideas, but his entire kit revolves around single target pressure in a meta dominated by massive area damage. Early on, he can occasionally look impressive, especially when fights are slower, but once you reach the late game, Sura starts disappearing faster than your motivation after losing 3 ranked matches in a row. The characters in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right, Akasha, Dracula, Jessica, Margaret, Oros, Severe, Stella, and Ying. You know a character is sitting in C tier when every match with them feels like a motivational speech. Come on, you can do it. I believe in you. Sometimes they pop off and surprise everyone. Other times, they fold faster than a lawn chair at a family barbecue. That is basically the entire vibe of this section in Realm Traveler. Akasha is one of those damage dealers that can look terrifying for about 15 seconds. She throws out solid area damage against the front and middle rows, spreads bleed effects around, and gains bonus critical hits against already bleeding targets. She can even heal herself after getting kills, which sounds great in theory. The problem is that her whole identity depends on actually securing those kills. If enemies survive with a tiny sliver of health, Akasha suddenly goes from predator to emotionally exhausted employee working overtime. Dracula feels like the developers took a normal bleed character and added chaos just to see what would happen. He spreads area bleed pretty effectively, but the real gimmick is the chaos effect that can force enemies to randomly attack their own teammates. When it works, it is hilarious. Watching an enemy destroy their own backline never gets old, but relying on a 25% chance means some fights make Dracula look like a genius, while others make him look completely unemployed. Jessica is basically the definition of high risk, high reward. She boosts her own critical rate and critical damage to absurd levels, and can punish enemies with anti-heal while dealing extra damage to slower targets. If left untouched, she can absolutely melt teams. The issue is that she has the durability of wet tissue paper. Jessica needs constant protection, healing, babysitting, emotional support, and probably a personal bodyguard contract just to survive long enough to matter. Margaret is the type of support character that makes you appreciate patience. She can deal area damage, remove enemy buffs, and even reflect buffs back with Abyss Embrace. That utility is genuinely useful in longer fights. The downside is that everything about her feels slow. While modern teams are launching nuclear missiles every 2 seconds, Margaret is carefully organizing paperwork in the background. She is not bad, but she definitely operates on her own timeline. Oros has one very clear job: find the enemy with the highest attack stat and ruin their day. His burst targeting is consistent, and he also weakens enemy attack while stripping buffs from multiple opponents. That utility alone gives him value in certain matchups. Unfortunately, his damage numbers feel wildly inconsistent. One fight he looks like an assassin, the next fight he hits like somebody lightly tossing a pillow across the room. Severe is incredibly matchup dependent, which makes her both interesting and awkward. She deals area damage to the front row, applies heal reduction, and has tools like freeze against priests alongside anti-revive effects on multiple targets. Against healer-heavy teams, she can actually be very annoying to deal with. Outside of those specific situations though, her usefulness drops hard. Bringing Severe into the wrong matchup feels like showing up to a sword fight carrying kitchen utensils. Stella tries to do a little bit of everything. She provides decent area damage, boosts ally attack and speed, and even supports teammates through damage sharing and healing. Early and mid-game, that flexibility feels pretty nice, but once endgame scaling kicks in, Stella starts struggling to keep pace. Her numbers simply do not grow hard enough compared to stronger supports and carries, so eventually she starts feeling more like a temporary solution than a long-term investment. And then there is Ying, who is basically married to crowd control compositions. She spreads debuffs like slow and attack reduction very effectively, especially in freeze-focused setups. In the right team, Ying can help control the pace of the entire battle, but outside of dedicated crowd control compositions, her scaling drops off hard. Without the proper setup around her, Ying feels like a puzzle piece from a completely different box somehow ending up on your table. The characters in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right, Chandra, Ilya, Evie, Visna, Max, Milia, Mitabi, Shatia, and Zero. Somewhere between solid enough to use and why am I not just picking something stronger? B-tier characters in Realm Traveler live in that awkward middle ground. They are functional, they can win in fights, but they always come with a condition, a cooldown issue, or a "this works if everything goes right" disclaimer attached. Chandra is a good example of early promise that does not fully survive the long game. She brings decent area magical damage and a 50% chance to apply debuffs on her skills. On top of that, she increases magical damage taken on enemies and applies slow, which sounds like a strong control and damage setup. The problem is that her damage falls off hard after the early stages. Once enemies get tankier, Chandra starts feeling like she is contributing ideas rather than actual results. Ilya is one of those support units that saves runs but never feels comfortable doing it. She consistently removes debuffs from allies, increases attack by 25%, and even has a revive in her kit. That is a lot of utility packed into one character, but the trade-off is survivability. With very low health and poor sustainability, Ilya often feels like she is one stray hit away from becoming part of the problem she is trying to solve. Evie is more of a self-contained survival specialist. She can cleanse her own debuffs, gain immunity to crowd control for 2 rounds, and buff her own critical rate and accuracy. She is very hard to disrupt, which makes her reliable in certain situations. However, she does not bring meaningful team support or area damage, so she ends up feeling like a strong solo performer stuck in a team game. Fizna is all about stacking pressure through debuffs. She can deal area damage while applying Trampled, which reduces physical immunity, and her skills partially ignore defense and damage sharing. On paper, that sounds like a strong scaling damage dealer. In reality, she needs those debuffs to be fully set up before she can shine. If the setup does not happen, her damage feels underwhelming and inconsistent. Max is clearly designed for DOT-focused compositions. He can hit up to 4 enemies with area damage, apply bleed, and even inflict petrify if the target is already debuffed. That synergy makes him feel powerful in specific teams. Outside of damage overtime setups though, he loses a lot of his identity and becomes much harder to justify compared to more flexible warriors. Melia sits in the classic support that tries to do everything category. She can heal the entire team, provide a 30% attack buff, and even revive or heal the lowest health ally depending on the situation. That flexibility is valuable, but her revive cooldown is extremely long. When it is not available, she can feel like a standard healer without enough extra impact to stand out. Mitabi is very much a control-focused magical damage dealer. She hits multiple enemies with area magical damage and brings solid synergy through slow and freeze effects. Her role is more about controlling enemy tempo than dealing massive damage. The issue is that her raw damage is low, which means if the crowd control does not matter in a fight, Mitabi quickly loses relevance. Shatia is one of the more dramatic characters in this tier. She deals area damage, applies bleed to the front row, can heal herself, and even revives on death with a 30% immunity boost. That sounds like a survival nightmare for opponents. However, anti-revive strategies shut her down very effectively, and when that happens, she loses a big part of her identity and becomes much easier to handle. Zero rounds out the tier as a fast-paced area attacker. He can hit the front 2 rows, apply ignite based on attack, and increase speed, which gives him a nice tempo advantage in early fights. The problem is that his base stats simply do not keep up with stronger warriors. As the game progresses, Zero starts feeling like he is running ahead of the meta, but without enough power to actually keep up with it. The characters in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right, Ana Annie, Eudora, Ayeta, Xiao, Nosa, Oriham, Yui, and Talumex. Now we are finally getting into the part of the tier list where characters stop feeling like situational picks and start feeling like actual team identity builders. A tier in Realm Traveler is basically where your account starts to stabilize, because these units can carry roles properly without constantly asking for help from 3 other systems. Ana Annie is one of those supports that quietly carries entire fights without asking for attention. She can heal the whole team with an area heal every 2 turns, and that alone would already make her valuable. But then she goes further by buffing 4 allies with attack and critical stats, which turns your entire squad into a damage machine. On top of that, she provides damage sharing and magical damage immunity, making her one of the safest sustained supports you can bring into long battles. She is basically the definition of controlled stability. Eudora is what happens when a support refuses to pick a side between defense and offense. She shields the 3 lowest health allies, which already saves runs more often than you would expect. But then, she also deals consistent area damage, either applying random debuffs or healing the entire team while boosting attack. That dual identity makes her one of the most reliable hybrid supports in the game. She does not just keep people alive, she actively shifts the momentum of fights. Ieta brings that satisfying everything is slowly falling apart for the enemy team energy. She deals decent area damage to all enemies and has a chance to apply curse with every hit. But her real value comes from detonating those curse stacks for extra damage. When she gets going, fights feel like a chain reaction where every debuff turns into more damage. She is not flashy in a single hit, but over time she absolutely snowballs pressure. Xiao is the kind of unit that frontliners either respect or regret ignoring. She deals area damage to the front row with guaranteed curse inflation, which makes her extremely consistent. At the same time, she is also one of the strongest single-target burst damage dealers in the game. That combination of reliable area pressure and high burst makes her incredibly flexible. If you put Xiao in the front line, she does not just participate in fights, she dictates them. Noza is pure efficiency wrapped in damage optimization. She can ignore a significant portion of enemy defense and always targets the lowest health enemy, which makes her extremely good at finishing fights. On top of that, she applies a massive healing reduction debuff for 3 turns. That alone shuts down a lot of sustain-heavy compositions. Noza does not waste time with setup or gimmicks. She simply deletes problems before they become bigger problems. Oraham is one of those characters that feels like he is always one step away from overperforming. He deals area damage to front and mid rows and has a strong chance to apply Curse, which keeps enemies constantly pressured. But his most dangerous trait is how he repeatedly bursts the lowest health enemy while healing himself for a portion of the damage dealt. That lifesteal makes him surprisingly hard to remove once he starts rolling in fights. Yui is easily one of the strongest supports in the entire game and the backbone of many top-tier teams. She provides strong area healing while also shredding enemy defense, which immediately increases team damage output. On top of that, she buffs allies with attack, critical rate, and critical damage, which is basically everything a damage dealer wants. Yui does not just support the team, she upgrades the entire team into a higher tier version of itself. Talamex closes out A tier as a very specific but extremely strong debuffer for demon-focused compositions. He deals area damage to all enemies with a solid curse application rate, while also passively granting himself crowd control immunity. That makes him surprisingly hard to shut down. In the right setup, especially demon synergy teams, Talamex feels like a constant pressure engine that slowly drains the enemy's ability to respond. The characters in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right, Asura, Avalon, Brand, Raphael, Catherine, and Mile. At this point in the tier list, we are no longer talking about strong characters or good value picks. S tier in Realm Traveler is where units stop asking for permission and start deciding how the fight is going to end before the opponent even realizes it started. Asura is pure execution pressure disguised as a damage dealer. She constantly targets the lowest health enemy, which means she naturally cleans up fights without hesitation. When enemies drop below 40% health, she spikes with bonus damage, and if she secures a kill, she can absorb a portion of the target's maximum health, which keeps her rolling through teams. On top of that, she brings a high chance to inflict silence, shutting down enemy skill usage at the worst possible moment for them. She does not just finish fights, she accelerates their collapse. Avalon is what happens when burn teams are allowed to become a system instead of just a damage type. She consistently applies area burn and spreads divine fire across the entire enemy team. Once burn is active, she unlocks a stun chance that turns fights into constant interruption cycles. 45% stun chance on burning enemies is not just control, it is chaos management. In burn-focused compositions, Avalon turns every turn into a ticking disaster for the opponent. Brand is a specialist designed to punish specific roles, especially priests. He prioritizes them directly, deals increased damage to them, and can still deliver strong front row burst damage on top of that. His 60% petrify chance is what pushes him over the edge, turning key enemies into statues at critical moments. Brand does not care about fair fights. He cares about removing the exact unit your team was relying on. Raphael takes AoE burst and burn synergy and pushes it into consistency territory. He can apply divine fire through area attacks and has a unique mechanic where, if he does not land a critical hit, his next turn is guaranteed to crit. That alone removes the usual randomness from burst damage. Combined with strong scaling in AoE compositions, Raphael becomes extremely reliable in extended fights. He is the kind of damage dealer that never really has a bad turn. Catherine is a burst-oriented frontliner who thrives on tempo control. She can hit the front 2 rows with area damage while also self-buffing her attack and critical damage, which rapidly increases her kill potential. Her 70% chance to reduce enemy critical stats by 25% also makes her surprisingly disruptive against other damage dealers. Catherine does not just hit hard, she also makes sure the enemy cannot hit back as effectively. Mael closes out S tier as one of the most oppressive kits in the entire game. He applies strong area damage while almost guaranteeing curse on the front row. On top of that, he steals attack from the highest damage enemy, directly weakening the opponent's carry while strengthening himself. The most dangerous part, however, is the confusion effect that can force enemies to attack their own allies. That single mechanic alone can swing entire fights in unpredictable and often devastating ways for the opponent. The video ends here. See you in another video. Don't forget to subscribe.